avgrund mellan känsla och sentimentalitet. Preludiet du spelar talar om återhållen smärta, inte om drömmerier. Du måste vara lugn, klar och kär.
På detta sätt slutade första akten. Vi har nu lärt känna våra personer. Låt dem göra de första turerna i denna föga allvarligt menade kontradans.
Och teatern i mitt liv, och jag är en ganska talangfull skådespelerska.
Du är precis som någon inom film.
Ni ser inte oss, men vi ser er. Slutet är nära.
Det låter verkligen hotfullt.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Denver Public Library's Saturday Matinee. As always, my name is Daria. Together with Andrew, our co-host, we are supporting today's discussions of Ingmar Bergman's 1957's Over Seventh Seal. As always, use the chat for all of your awesome comments and questions. We'll look at those in the last 15 to 20 minutes. As far as the discussion goes, keep in mind, we are here to talk about this film and their related works. So please keep your questions focused on that. And as always, be excellent to each other. The January 2nd talk with Brian Johnson on Under the Skin will be uploaded shortly to the Denver Library's YouTube channel. And the film and the book list will be sent out during that time. The recommended list of titles mentioned today we'll send out after this event concludes. You don't have to take notes if you don't want to. And if you're having trouble with picture or the sound, please message myself or Andrew. We'll do our very best to help you out. Keep yourself muted to avoid any distractions or interruptions from our panel. And now in the chat and on your cam, please give a very warm welcome to our wonderful panel. Film critic Walter Chaw and the actress and director, Natasha Lyonne.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today on this sort of frigid, it feels more frigid because I'm in my basement, literally and figuratively. It's very cold. But thank you for being here today to talk about this sort of chilly film that I've always found to be really actually quite bawdy and earthy and horny even. I love this movie so much, I can't even begin to tell you. But let's start today by talking a little bit about, very broadly, the Swedish film industry. It sort of begins with the Swedish Film Institute called the Svensk Biografteatern in 1907. The company hired in 1909 a guy named Charles Magnusson, and he, in turn, worked almost exclusively with two directors, Victor Sjöström and Marit Stiller. And they created sort of a treasure trove of silent classics, among them Victor Sjöström's The Phantom Carriage, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. These three men essentially are the headwaters for all of Swedish cinema. When they left in the 1930s at the advent of sound, Victor Sjöström and Marit Stiller to move to America, as it happens, to sort of chase their fortunes here for a while, the entire Swedish film industry kind of went into hibernation. They're still creating stuff, but not at the same volume and quality as with these two guys. Sjöström did return; they both did, but he largely directed stage after he came back. He took over the head though of the Svensk Biografteatern when he returned, and among the people post-war that he began to foster was a guy named Ingmar Bergman, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along, obviously. There was another director at this time named Vilgot Sjöman in the post-war period in Sweden. He did a movie called I Am Curious, and it was very, very, very sexy, especially by the standards of that age. It was kind of explicit. It was considered to be porn. And so the United States had a really interesting idea about what Swedish film was, and still does, I think, to this day. That it's either really seriously impenetrable art or it's porn. I'm not sure that's inaccurate, but modern film industry now, we have great works like Force Majeure, like Let the Right One In, which we talked about with the great Peter Ramsey a few weeks ago. Interesting movies coming out of Sweden. The theater culture in Sweden is fascinating as well. The prominent playwright there, named August Strindberg, is a key influence on Bergman as well. His play from 1902 called A Dream Play is a play that Bergman has cited repeatedly as the key influence, perhaps, in all of his cinematic art. Read it and saw it and produced it. He was a theater manager before he was a filmmaker, and then he saw Victor Sjöström's The Phantom Carriage in 1921. Between those two events, he decided that he could make movies himself. Strindberg says about his play, A Dream Play, that it was the work that plagued him the most, it haunted him. It abolished conventional sort of narrative. It transcended barriers of time and space. Characters swapped. It was all of these things that we would recognize from a close study of all of Bergman's films. You can find its birth perhaps in A Dream Play. And also, as it happens in a little 8 episode Netflix series called Russian Doll that I saw a couple of years ago, that freaking blew my mind. We binged it, my wife and I. I've binged it a couple times since then. It is so smart. It is so passionate. I know what's going to happen, and the last scene of it makes me cry every single time. So we'll talk a little bit about that hopefully today as well. Russian Doll is a freaking masterpiece. Masterpiece. If you guys have not already watched this movie, this 8 hour series, please watch it. It is so smart. It is so brilliant. It reminds me of All That Jazz. It reminds me of the last scene as it happens in The Seventh Seal. It's echoed in a kind of jubilant, I think, sort of way in Russian Doll. It is the breadth of knowledge and experience of you know culture in the 20th century, I think. But on top of that, it's a really emotional, personal talk about survival, and it touches me in any number of ways. It's unbelievable, the ending of it. The emotional catharsis that I had of it is rare, I think, anymore, because I watch way too many films and I have a hard shell around my heart. But that movie, that series is so good, so good. Not the least of which because she uses that love song in just exactly the right way. When I was in graduate school, I had a seminar studying John Milton, and the professor of that class, a wonderful woman named Pampa Banerjee, she used to refer to something called the Milton bogey. And what she said the Milton bogey was, in her beautiful accent that I won't even attempt, uh, she said that it was that thing where people hear the name John Milton and not having ever read anything by him, immediately presume that it is impenetrable, it is snooty. It has nothing for me. It's ivory tower garbage, whatever. Until they read Milton and they figure out that Milton is really sexy and exciting and fun. And his best character in Paradise Lost is Satan. He knew what was up. Um, I think Bergman has the same sort of bogey attached to him. When we talk about Ingmar Bergman, even the criticism at the time of Bergman, the glowing criticism in the United States of The Seventh Seal, for instance, was talking about how it was high art, and at last, film has reached the pinnacle of its potential, and all these things used to describe a movie that no one would ever see on purpose, not unless they were trying to impress somebody, perhaps. But once you watch Bergman, I think you'll find something different. It is chthonic and horrifying sometimes. It is romantic and sexy in other times. And if you have the chance, and if you have not already, I highly recommend that you read his autobiography, The Magic Lantern. I'm going to hold it up here. The Magic Lantern is the single most awesome filmmaker autobiography I have ever read. It is perverse, it is stunningly strange and brutal, and also beautiful and poetic. A little statement about a little insight into my marriage this morning. I was reading passages out of this to my wife, and we were just laughing and laughing. Ingmar Bergman, The Magic Lantern. So I want to read a little bit about his first memory that he writes about. He writes, I suffered from several indefinable illnesses and could never really decide whether I wanted to live at all. Deep down in my consciousness, I can recall my actual condition, the stench of my body's secretions, the damp, chafing clothes, the soft glow of the nightlight, the door into the next room just ajar, the nursemaid's deep breathing, pattering steps, whispering voices, reflections of the sun and the carafe of water. I can recall it all. but I do not remember any fear that came later. Ingmar Bergman, fun guy at parties. And he also talks in here in this really published in 1987. He only talks about the Seventh Seal. His most well known is the big one, right? He only talks about it for like 2 pages, and we'll say a little bit about what he says about that as we get more into talking about the film. Bergman was born in 1918. His mother, during pregnancy and as she gave birth, was suffering from the Spanish flu. The movie itself, The Seventh Seal, is a plague film. And because I'm a fun dad, I made my kids watch it with me during quarantine this year and sort of wrote about that experience and their first exposure to it. The other thing I would say about The Seventh Seal, and we'll of course do a deep dive with our amazing guest today, but we named our daughter Mia. She's 17 this year, 18 this year, 17. She's 18. That's ridiculous. We named her Mia because after the BB Anderson character in The Seventh Seal, and I want to tell a joke, and it's never done well, and jokes in Zoom don't do well, but in Zoom I don't know that I'm bombing, so I'm going for it. I would tell people, hey guys, I named my daughter. Whenever I taught a class or whatever, I would say, hey, we named our daughter after a character in The Seventh Seal. Her name is Augustus Block. Ah, it's the timing, maybe. I don't know. I think the content's great. Okay, I want to introduce our guest today. She started as a kid actor. She was 6 years old. The first time I think I ever remember seeing her was she was Opal in Pee Wee's Playhouse, and Pee Wee's Playhouse changed my brain chemistry, so I kind of remembered that. She was in Everyone Says I Love You, which I think is pretty underestimated. She was in a movie called Slums of Beverly Hills, where her character comes out of the bathroom one morning after puberty has struck overnight and says, "I'm deformed," in that inimitable way. And it's still a line that my wife and I repeat with great hilarity whenever certain mishaps happen biologically. She was in But I'm a Cheerleader, American Pie. She's known for all three of those. Detroit Rock City, which I like quite a lot. Freeway 2, the sequel to a wonderful film and a really interesting movie by its own right, I would say. She was also in Blade Trinity, which lots of stories I've read about Blade Trinity and Mr. Snipes. One of her co-stars in that film, Patton Oswalt, will be one of our guests in April. So I'm excited to get both sides of the Blade Trinity story there. Which immediately follows, after that period of real production for her, a time where she was not around as much, some health issues, some things that she needed to take care of away, and then she came back in 2010, and she was in a movie directed by Abel Ferrara, who is one of my artistic heroes. I really admire his work, called 444 Last Day on Earth. And she's in something that you might have heard of called Orange is the New Black. She's been in Portlandia. She does a voice on Steven Universe. Oh my God, she directed a short movie called Cabiria, Charity, and Chastity, starring her friend, no ands in there, Cabiria, Charity, Chastity, with her friend, starring her friend Maya Rudolph. It is quite brilliant, full of the obvious whip smart wit of Natasha Lyonne. So without further ado, someone who I feel like has been a part of my life for a long time. So without further ado, the remarkable Natasha Lyonne. Thank you for joining us today, Natasha.
Walter, sheesh. That is an honor. I mean,
Well,
like being seen, but in my fantasies of what that might feel like. So thank you.
well, come on. It's just the least I could do. It's so glad you're here and so excited. I remember when I reached out to you after you tweeted something about Seventh Seal, and I'm like, hey, you want to maybe do this thing? And your answer, I don't know if you remember, you said, yeah, sure, I'm horny for Bergman. So I want to sort of dig in a little bit there. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with this film and why The Seventh Seal.
It's I think I'm just so self-taught and accidental. And just certain things are just these giant markers in my psyche that just I think as a existential teenager, just doing my thing, taking acid, not understanding what was happening or why. There are just these certain markers that really just became formative. And it's funny that now the older I get, it's been a long time. It's 15 years since any psychedelics, sadly. But it's I think that those it's sort of like the older I get, the more I forget. Like everything else falls away. That sort of meant nothing to me as my brain gets clogged up with logistics of being a busy person and an adult against my will. And so certain markers like the seventh seal, I just realize how significant they are, that they're just like in my DNA. It's almost like when people talk about like reparenting themselves or something, it's like I reparented myself with a series of movies like Knights of Cabiria or The Seventh Seal or sort of some of these real, all that jazz, like these formative markers that I was like, this, I'll just sort of decide that this is who I am as a person. And so, yeah, like other information can kind of like come and go. But more and more I realize like I only really have like 10 references or something, you know? Um,
But they're all good references. I mean, Knights of Cabiria is maybe my favorite Fellini. Absolutely. You also mentioned All That Jazz. It is an all-time platinum masterpiece. You mentioned The Conversation, which is my favorite movie of all time. I mean, these touchstones. What is it about these films that speaks to you? Are you able to get that granular about The Seventh Seal, for instance?
um, yeah, I mean, on some level, I think that, I mean, the thing that breaks my heart in a way, without being like blanket statement or just hater for no reason, but the thing in a way that breaks my heart maybe about modern cinema is the loss of humor in serious existential works. Like it seems to have become more and more delineated of like, this is something that we must take seriously. And I almost feel like you can like see everyone like systematically trying to get awards or Reddit threads or something, as opposed to being in the sort of humor of the absurdity of um, that we're sort of organically all in this thing together, and it's inherently absurd at all times. This just these basic tentpoles of a seven seal of like death comes for all of us. Like one of my favorite scenes, of course, there's the confession scene, but that scene with the painter or whatever, just being like, why are you painting this? And it's like, everybody needs to remember, death is coming for us. That's not going to be very popular. Well, that's not really the point, is it? Like, what about the plague? We're all going to be knotted up in pain. This is not going to go well for you, pal. Like, there's such sort of comedy to that. And I think in a way, yeah, like being able to walk all the levels of what it feels like, to be a person. Obviously, I'm so into Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, which I think is, one of the great comedy books of our time. I'm kidding. No, but I just, but it really, I mean, that was very much like day one in the writer's room of Russian Doll, walking in with that book, being like, I think this is a half-hour sitcom. It's in here somewhere. If only we can find it, which is, just what would it be like to be on that, uh, just type of walkabout, but in the daily life that we're all experiencing. When sort of death says to it's Antonius Black, is that right? Uh,
Yeah.
so when death's like, most people don't think about these things or something. I think that's who says it anyway. So, and it's kind of like, I don't know that I believe that in a way. I kind of think everybody does think about these things. And so, yeah, I guess I find them to be like deeply universal and almost calming, like soul soothing of this idea that we're not alone in this experience of like, what's it all about? What is this game?
Well, I think that's ultimately what I found so soothing about Russian Doll. Honestly, like, the topic of suicide, the topic of surviving, and at the end of it, when he says, hey, can you promise me that I'm gonna enjoy my life, I'm gonna have a good time, and you're like, absolutely not, but I can promise you that I'll be there with you. That feeling of togetherness is what I find in great art, right? Is that you can hear a voice from Ingmar Bergman, who writes about being locked in his Lutheran minister father's closet, and where creatures eat your toes. This is such a good book, you guys. But he's saying something that's universal. And to your point, I think a lot of people don't really think about existential issues on purpose. They don't realize they are until they're brought up against it. And I think that's what's the brilliance of the Seventh Seal so much. And I love the scene with the painter as well, the fresco painter, because he says, "Why cheer them up? Why not scare them?" And it's funny, and all of the Seventh Seal is quite funny. I love the death slapstick funny, death sawing down the tree, or that the guy's hiding in. I mean, that's funny, and the way that the squire acts all the time, sticking his tongue out and doing these little broad physical gestures in the middle of what's I think perceived now to be very grim foreign film, is all this real bodiness to it. The real earthiness and approachability for it. And the connection to your work, I think, becomes clearer and clearer the more that we talk about it. You say you really like the confession scene. Can you talk a little bit more about what about that moment that you like? He says, like, I cry out to him in the dark. Um, I wish I could tear God from my heart is a mirror, and I see myself reflected in it, and it fills me with terror. Can you talk a little bit about fear and terror, and looking in the mirror?
Oh yeah, I mean, what do I love more than a dark night of the soul? I just think, I mean, the big line in there that I would say is sort of at the nut of season one of Russian Doll anyway, and not to make it about that, but when he says, "My indifference to my fellow men has cut me off," like so. Um, this like sadly solipsistic nature of depression or existential rumination that is a very sort of like deep in self experience, thereby kind of cuts one off from any sort of uh connection, and it's like you can almost like feel him later sort of like eating the wild strawberries and sort of be like, oh right, this is a part of life too. It's almost like he remembers that. It's kind of like the thing that's gotten lost in quarantine. It's like there's all of me is just sort of like, oh, thank God, no more of this game of like we should meet for coffee. I'm like, why? I already know you. How about to sort of stay home and not meet for coffee? Wouldn't that be a better thing to do? And then periodically, like you know, interfacing with people. And obviously, why I love jokes so much, it's like all of a sudden you're kind of walking around and laughing with a friend somehow in a face mask. And you're like, oh, right, that's also life. Like it is when we're all alone, sort of like in the darkness, it's very easy to sort of experience it as empirical truth, like looking at one's face in the mirror and being like, nothing means anything, and then just as soon as you're sort of like laughing and, certainly Manhattan air or something in the middle of the night, you're like, wait, but what's this feeling? That means, and like suddenly, like when he's sort of has that switch where he's like looking at his hand and he's like, there's blood runs through this veins. I am alive, and that duality that I think exists in all of us of this like certain loneliness. Surely this is my personal truth that can so quickly flip with sort of connection to fellow man. It's just such a curiosity.
And it's very much like a spiritual and religious ecstasy, right? When you have that moment of wow, you lift your eyes up from whatever it is, right? And you see the world. I love that scene that you mentioned with the eating the wild strawberries in the field. And of course, that very same year, 1957, his movie Wild Strawberries is released, starring the director Victor Sjostrom as a in one of the most horrifying, scary films that I've ever seen. But he in that scene in Seventh Seal, he says, "I will carry this memory between my hands as carefully as if it were a bowl brimming with freshly milked milk." There's just such a real simplicity. That's why we named our daughter Mia, because she's the the wife, Mary, essentially, of in the traveling actors group, because she has such a wonderful life. She has the love of her family. She has a simple expectations of whatever. And my daughter is amazing, but she's not like that at all. But we hoped, and we still hope that for her. It's such a beautifully drawn thing. Can you talk a little bit about actors and their role in the Seventh Seal as the heroes, essentially, as the moral center of this questing universe. He sees God finally, but it's in the actors, the family.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in many ways for me in my life that really has become comedians on some level. Only because it feels like uh in many ways like laughing against your will is as close as a person can get to an altered state, sort of without taking something, because it's so surreal that people have this gift to be able to twist sort of ideas on their face. Like they sit somewhere between, so surrealism and magic, because it's kind of like, sure, that's a concept and we could get bogged down, and it sort of becomes like, I love when he's like, we'll make a, whatever, like a juggler who can just like orbit a ball in the air or whatever. That sort of idea. And even, what she does in that scene, I was thinking about today, of the way she's just kind of laughing while everybody is sort of otherwise what might feel really sort of exhausting, of just sort of like naming philosophical concepts in the ether, just they're naming big ideas, but she's just sort of laughing and passing the bowl between her. I will say that I'm not a huge fan of that guy. The guy with the fiddle or whatever. I whatever that style is drives me a little bit nuts. I'm like, I am this guy. I don't love that style. but but yeah, I mean, now I'm just thinking about more bits with the actors or whatever, that weird uh kind of when that insulting couplet when they're going back and forth and he's whispering little bits into his ear of like how to insult properly. um I don't know. I mean, and some very pure, sort of stripped of all of the garbage that we think of sort of modern actors with, of like all of this baggage of ego, on a very sort of simple sort of core level of what they're meant to be, what we're meant to be, is sort of like transmitters of the human experience. We're supposed to be able to um, take what it feels like to be a person and kind of like, communicate that on command in a way that feels like it resonates. So we all feel sort of connected and seen. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, I love that you say that you don't like him very much, because there's that scene where he just gets the crap beat out of him, and he sort of crawls back to his wife, right, to Mia, and she's like, "Oh my God, you didn't start doing that thing, did you? That you do?" And he's like, "No, no, I didn't do that." Like, "Oh, you did the other thing. No one likes that either." So I think there's like a kind of good self-awareness, right? Of saying like, nobody really likes actors, but we need them. There's a certain point, like, he's exhausting. It's exhausting, but because you're always freaking on, man. But there's still yet some sort of divinity about this mirroring, and the movie, if anything, is about mirroring and looking, and see throughout, you see these skulls, and I think it's the mural painter again says something like, skull is more interesting than a naked woman. And again, read this, because there's so much weird stuff in here about his sexuality. He talks about puberty as this violent fusillade of pain, and it's so, yes, it's hilarious. Okay, because it's true. But yeah, I think there's that. But going back to the mural painter again, he talks about the boils from the plague, and how people try to tear the boils out. And the scene with the confession is immediately after that, when Augustus Block says that he wants to tear, Antonius Block says he wants to tear out God, in a very similar, the same language and everything. So can you talk to me about spirituality? Russian Doll is so huge about spirituality, not about religion, which is sort of like, a plague on mankind, but spirituality, and your journey with that to this point, from dropping acid and watching little Bergman all the way through to the Russian Doll.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real curiosity, because I always feel like it's so important to me to like not be a shapeshifter in this life. Like I really uh I really hate lies and like mendacity. You know what I mean? Like I think that's I think it's such a bummer that people think it's important to communicate in that way. I'm not sure what it does other than like slowly rot all our souls, that is the conceit of society for reasons unknown. And so I would, sort of, wrap religion into that, and also wrap in this idea of that for myself. Like, I think that when I'm with hipster buddies or something, it's very fun to be atheistic or something and be really, dark. Like, and then just as soon as like, I find myself in other moments, I'll be like, yes, surely there is meaning to all of this, but anyway, I think the truth is somewhere in between, that we're all having that experience of, I mean, I guess for Bergman, isn't his dad like a religious guy or something, right? So it's sort of this forced kind of questioning, which I guess is true for me. Obviously, I was like raised in religion with like a lot of Aramaic and Talmud study, but also sort of an outcast from a divorced home on scholarship who was, at a certain point I decided that I only wore black clothes and I wore black to school every day. So I was like studying Talmud while smoking cigarettes, being an outcast, so it was this weird thing though of just like, I think similarly, like just raised with so much religion that it's sort of, you're forced to be constantly considering everything up against this idea of God, but you're like, what is that? And it's almost like then the older you get, you're like, but what's science? But why do all these scientists believe in God? And what is this whole thing? So I think it's more than anything also, like, what does it mean if it means nothing? But then again, like, what is this sort of music of the spheres, how everything is so perfectly connected and yet so fractured and nothing means anything? And obviously it sort of feels like the hardest thing to reconcile in a sort of God concept of any kind. And by that, I just mean blanket, spirituality of either is there a meaning to life or is there no meaning to life, is sort of, just the rampant and graphic injustice that we're witnessing all the time makes it very hard to sort of like live in the sunlight of the spirit, because even if you can like glimpse a moment of surely that's the truth, there is beauty to all of this, it's just as quickly, you're sort of like struck with a photograph of, malnourished like children on the fucking streets. And you're like, what the fuck is life, Or you're like reading some story about, like that one really fucked me up. This woman who was recently, I guess, murdered on death row, and like the way she was fucking, like gangbanged by her fucking family, setting it up, her whole like life, and the trailer she grew up, and you're just like, what is the scale of humanity? And what is the scale of humanity of even one's own sense of like injustice from this motherfucker didn't text me back. I'm now in a state all day. You know what I mean? Like, don't they know that they should text me back? They're fucking my head. I'm up all night spinning out with like, negative looping thinking around a text message. Like, and there was this, the scales of life are very hard to make full peace with any sort of God idea, just over and over and over. And yet, much like in the Seventh Seal, there is also this experience of like faced with death. I'll never forget, obviously I appreciate that you referred to it as I took some time for my health, but obviously, what Walter's politely saying is obviously, I was a serious drug addict and then, I'm now in recovery and that's terrific and good luck to all of us. And, but just to say in that time, I remember that it was so weird having to be like stone cold sober, getting one of these valves replaced because I kind of beat it to a pulp and just sort of feeling like, this like red alert, like the sirens of like, I can't go in there. I can't go on that operating table. This is insane. Like they're going to try to kill me in there. You know what I mean? Like you can't like chainsaw open my sternum. In other words, it would be very easy to be sort of like OD'd and on an operating table. I don't know how I got here, but sort of like, stone cold to sort of walk in. So what feels to like, the human system, like certain death is suddenly you're like, I regret everything. Remember all those times I said, I hate myself and I wish I was dead? I take it all back. I meant nothing. Listen to me. This is great. Everything you set up is great. I revoke all my complaints about your systems, So it's a very just a very strange thing being a person. I mean, and I think that that's just sort of universal, and that this movie does it beautifully, and so much of Bergman does it, and so many of those movies that you listed at the top of this, or that we're talking about, as like the giants of cinema, they just go head on into it. They're not like, sorry, I keep cursing, but they're not, pussyfooting their way to that conversation. They're just sort of assuming that that's the resting baseline state that we're all in, and sort of jumping off and doing story from there, which
Uh,
I
Yes, it's brilliant. I think Bergman does that, walks that line brilliantly between sort of the micro earthy and the macro God and heaven sort of thing. And even some of his movies are called like The Great Silence. I also love that you apologize before saying pussyfooting of all of the things that you just said. Um, I love that. That's great. Okay, but I also want to talk a little bit about All That Jazz because, of course, All That Jazz has open heart surgery in it. Did you experience anything like that? Were you thinking about that when you're lying on that table and they're about to crack you open? Were you thinking, I'm like Roy Scheider and All That Jazz? Did that cross your mind?
I mean, I'm always thinking, I'm like, oh, I'm like Rush Center and all that jazz, and Richard Pryor and JoJo Dance of Your Life is. I'm always experiencing that, Walter. Yeah. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it is a curious thing of like, I think a lot about this year, the second season, without giving too much away. In many ways, is there's definitely like the Seventh Seal has come up more than once in the writers' room this year, and yeah, I would say that sort of like the events of life as they live in sort of space and time are just funny, because which is here and which is there, and I would say that that is sort of what it's like a little bit in any of these experiences of going under, or like cutting some sort of cord between um, this and whatever else there is a little bit like, um, not all events are ordered perfectly, which I think, that playing with the sense of fractured time is something that always appeals to me. I don't think that memory is really uh, quite like that, like only in terms of when we sort of go to sleep at night or something. It's, like a memory will pop in and you're like, where the fuck is this thing coming into like my psyche, like trying to take me out at this, 3 a.m. hour out of nowhere. That's a regret from 17 years ago. Why now? Or that's like a terror of a future terror that has nothing to do with, so I do think that in, if that's what you mean by all that, and of course musical sequences, I always, as soon as I get on the table, the operating table, it's just Ben Vereen and Jessica Lange nonstop, so
Oh,
it goes without saying.
well, so heaven is what you're saying.
I mean, I like what's so I wish that I was I always wish I was like a cleaner thinker. Fosse is like, what a gift to really have musicality like that, that I don't know that I see life as a series of like kaleidoscopic dance moves the way he can. I can't say I've actually had that experience, although I certainly wish I had.
So I'm going to read really quickly, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. So guys, have your questions ready for about the seventh seal today. In here, he talks about making the seventh seal and the inspiration for the seventh seal, and he introduces it as he really had to pee at a church service that his dad was giving, but he was blocked in by a large woman who wouldn't move for him. So he was in agony, in agony of needing to pee. And so to distract himself, he started looking at all of the illuminated panels and the windows around the church, and they were covered with stuff. And he says, like all churchgoers at all times, I have often become lost in altar pieces, triptychs, crucifixes, stained glass windows, and murals, where I could find Jesus and the robbers in blood and torment, Mary leaning on St. John, woman, behold thy son, behold thy mother, Mary Magdalene the sinner, who'd been the latest to fuck her, the night playing chess with death, Death sawing down the tree of life, a terrified wretch wringing his hands at the top, Death leading the dance to the dark lands, wheeling his sigh like a flag, the congregation keeping in a long line, and the jester bringing up the rear, the devils keeping the pot boiling, the sinners hurtling headlong into the depths, and Adam and Eve discovering their nakedness. Some churches are like Aquaria, not a bare patch. People everywhere, saints, prophets, angels, devils, and demons, all alive and flourishing. The here and beyond billowing over walls and arches, reality and imagination merged into robust myth making. Sinner, behold thy labors. Behold what awaits thee round the corner. Behold the shadow behind thy back. This became the seventh seal. All right. So, what questions do we have today, Daria, about Bergman and the seventh seal?
I would like to prompt you guys with a comment that we got from Haley. It goes like this. I love that during the strawberries and milk communion scene, the skull is always in the background, even though it is the most peaceful scene in the film. Death is always looming.
So a few weeks ago, we sat down with another brilliant director, and we talked about The Spirit of the Beehive. And in that movie, there's a painting of a saint that sort of looms in an office, and there's a skull in it. These are like memento mori in paintings, right? There's a whole style of it where there's always a reminder of life, even in death. And I think, Natasha, you touched on that a little bit. But can you expand a little bit about memento mori? Even in your own work, this idea about this constant reminder of our mortality.
Yeah, I mean, it's so effective in that scene. I was looking at, and I think in a weird way, that's the comedy of it. As I was like, the people really just used to have better personalities or something. When I say this idea about this sort of like self-seriousness, like a disease I really hate is whisper acting that I feel has fully taken over cinema in a way that I just cannot figure. I'm like, I can't fucking hear you, and I have a cell phone, so I am not afraid to use it. Speak up, please. Like we all know it's a movie, all right? And I love movies, so please do entertain me. Like, why? What am I leaning in? So just to say that for me, like the skull in the background of that scene is a great example of it's just got a little bit of personality. I mean, it's like not quite so heavy handed. I'll never forget in the that that short that I made with Maya. There's that scene with Fred, and he's kind of like wearing his half-face Fellini makeup, and he's pretending he's a teacher at the La Strada School for Clowns, which was literally just driving around. I was like, I hate short films. What a short! You gotta make a short film, prove people you can direct. And I was like, can I make it in gibberish? And he was like, sure. We were just driving. I was like, great, La Strada School for Clowns. That's a short movie, okay? And later, I remember with this wonderful production designer, JC Molina, who also did Honey Boy and everything. He's so great. And I explained to him, like, well, it's a classroom, so we need bats. And he was like, what do you mean bats? It's a classroom. I was like, well, the back of the his chalkboard needs to be based on the chalkboard from Brewster McCloud, and there's got to be bats, taxidermied bats. Like it's sort of why for no fucking reason, because why not? Because let people enjoy sort of being like just having we all have very busy brains, and how nice to be able to have to think of two things at once, so that this is not just a frame about a scene about, a beautiful young woman and a bowl of milk. I mean, this is like also a scene about just remember that the two are always hand in hand. Remember that there is, no light without darkness. So it's always like there's that great quote that opens that Thomas Pynchon Against the Day or something, you know what I mean? Which is something to the effect of that, without light, there is no darkness, and so on.
Yeah, I wish that the quote that I'm thinking of was more impressive. It's from Anne Rice when she's one of the vampires is talking about looking at mortal women and saying, "All I see is the skull beneath the skin." That all they see is mortality when they look at beings that are mortal. And then there's I love early on the beach when they're looking for directions, and the squire jumps off and sort of like and finds a corpse and stares into his empty sockets for a minute, and then gets back on the horse, and the knight is like, well, what did he say? Was he rude? He's like, no, he was quite eloquent. He was quite eloquent in his silence. So yeah, it's these flags all the way through the film to say, to your point, there's something going on. There's always something going on. The confessional scene, he shot through the grate, so he's sort of, crossed and bisected. And later when he's talking to the witch who's about to be burned, the woman accused of being a witch, it's also through bars. There's a sort of sense of like spiritual separation or being caged in a certain line of thinking or thought. And he's only free at the end of it, ironically, by freeing, doing the one good act that he talks about in the first scene of the movie was distracting death long enough for the family to get away. That's the one good thing that he did in his life, was to allow these plague spreaders, these super spreader event vectors, to go and continue on across the European countryside. But there's always something going on in this film. And I would say Bergman, generally, all of his films after this point are, a lot of them shot by the great cinematographer Sven Nykvist, are beautifully visually expressive. There's something always going around. Whatever they're saying, there's something visually happening in the frame. And this reminder of spiritual absence, this reminder of looming death, all of these things, becomes a main character, I think, in his movies. And you see it literally expressed in that scene with the bowl of milk, with all this life and beauty. And BB Anderson, who's ever been more pretty than BB Anderson right now, right here in this movie? And yet there's the death looking over all of their shoulders, as he does us all, I guess.
Yeah. Does Sven also do Persona and Through a Glass Darkly?
Yeah, he did Persona for sure. I don't know Through Glass Darkly, but yeah. Yep.
I don't Through a Glass Darkly. I mean, that's like one of those things when I say like tent poles in teenage psyche or whatever. It's like, yeah, that's life,
Yeah.
A little trivia. The night before we started shooting the first season, Russian Doll, which is now years ago, I guess, I was so nervous that the only thing I could think to do was to go double feature. And at the Film Forum, it was Persona. And then I went to Brooklyn and watched Possession. And that was the night before we shot.
Wow.
I got to get in the zone. It's going to be okay.
What better to soothe nerves than a screening of Possession?
Yeah.
Really.
That I kind of passed out midway. I started getting...
All right. Other questions?
Yeah, a couple of people asked this. Tilly and Natasha, you have some very ardent admirers here. People are very, very excited to have you. So the question was basically, if The Seventh Seal was to get a remake, say today, and you could pick your role, who would you want to play?
We don't have to remake it. Just to say, that's an option, you guys. As a team, we can decide. We just don't have to. Yeah, maybe that actor's part, so that way I could be like, yo, you got to back it down. You're too much.
I feel like, in a way, though, just based on those little tidbits that you've dropped, maybe season 2 of your show is the remake of The Seventh Seal and Spirit. And the role, to answer for you, is the knight. You were home from the Crusades, right? You've seen terrible shit, and now you're back, and you are questioning everything from your perspective. You've hopped off the table. You have something to say about what you experienced. And I think that's what really infuses all of the first season of Russian Doll for me, is that real wisdom, that lived in wisdom of it, from the very first scene in the party, when you're complaining about being 36. I could wish to complain about being 36. Stop yourself. But yeah, there's that.
Say that, like, that is, I think that really is like in this, second round of life, it really is the only thing I can hope for, is that, I just wish we all were a little bit, I think that's what I love about Bergman, is he's very sort of front facing around how tricky it is to be a person. And that is, he's sort of going out and saying that as a universal experience. The Seventh Seal is like a huge hit. You know what I mean? People get it. They need it. And in so doing, hopefully that there is a modicum of relief there. I mean, that is, I think, sort of the whole game.
We have time maybe for one more question, Daria, or one or two.
You know what? This is going to be real selfish, but it's something that I was wondering. It was Kansu who asked this. Why do you think it's a bowl of milk and not another beverage?
Interesting. You're right. It's Coca-Cola. And that's why it's Coca-Cola and wild strawberries. And we were wrong. We took a shot in the dark, and boy, did we botch it. Uh,
That's how
what
they funded the damn thing.
I don't know the answer.
Well, milk for me is like a real nurturing beverage, right? It's like mother's milk. All of these metaphors that we use in literature and film around milk is about sort of its purity and its essential, nourishing aspects of it. Faulkner, right, and Grapes of Wrath talks about Rose of Sharon and that, and I think it means something when he says freshly milked milk. This idea of temporariness. How long is that going to last? In the even in the brisk Swedish air, how long could freshly milk possibly be okay to drink? Is it even okay to drink? I'm not a scientist. Um, but there's this element of temporariness, I think, about that, and nurturing about that scene. And so when you have this sort of, I foraged in the fields and here, milk, drink it, milk, and they're passing it around. It's a very essential, primal beverage, much more so than water that you pull out of, or Coke, that there's something about milk that has an essential biological thing that I think pings off of us a little bit. It does for me anyway. And when he talks about a bowl of milk, holding it carefully between his hands and everything, it just says more to me than a bowl of water. And in a movie that's as highly symbolized and symbolic as this movie is, everything matters. I think if it was water instead of milk, you would be thinking of baptism and stuff like that, rather than thinking of like nurturing in this sort of family. And thinking of the mother providing milk is essential, is basic, right? Um, but I think maybe that's where it goes, without going too deep. But just saying like, hey, too late, right? But saying that Bergman, he's talking about big things and he's using big images, and milk is a bigger image than some other beverages, I think.
Isn't that so fun? I mean, like now I feel like if you tried to make this, everyone would be like, "Oh my God, this is so literal." I really miss that about movies, that you were just able to be like, the thing is the thing. And yeah, it's a much more, must have been pretty liberating, rather than the thing is the thing to comment on.
Right. Well, and I think Bergman's genius, and very few people can get away, actually, I think, with being this literal, because usually you just roll your eyes, right? Shut up. It's like whenever Sam Levinson wants to use James Brown or something, like, shut up, man. You're 20 years old. I don't know what you're talking. So, but, when you watch like The Seventh Seal, you don't have to comment on that. Sorry. I just threw that out there. But when you watch someone like Bergman, though, this is a real genius, actually, at work here. He's a genius. And he says things literally. And it sort of inspires the not literal. It inspires this conversation. It inspires 60 years of conversation by being quote unquote literal. His images and broad, his symbols, but these are archetypes. They're not just symbols, right? They're
But
archetypes.
that's kind of funny. How people always complain about people that talk about their dreams. And then I was like thinking about Eight and a Half, and I was thinking about this, and I was like, yeah, thinking about Lynch or whatever. I mean, and like similarly, like when it's, the sort of the clouds in the beginning and the crow or whatever the fuck that bird is. And it's really like, oh, we're going to go here right away. Sort of like in Eight and a Half, he's like, oh, right away, we're going to get this guy out of this car and into the clouds. I mean, it's very like that. It's just funny that all these heavyweights are sort of really shameless about saying, we're going to talk about my dreams today. And that's fun.
Yeah, and I think the best poets talk about their inspiration this way as well. It's like a divine wind sort of blows through them. They're not in control of it. They're just sort of expressing their unconscious, right? I mean, Kubla Khan was written by Coleridge after a dream. He got up and wrote down as much as he could remember before he forgot it. And so, we're able to name these people because they're geniuses. When you explicitly try to do the things that these people are doing, you end up with some really embarrassing stuff, you know. But these guys are doing it in a way that's so conscious. What's that?
No shame in trying.
Yeah, I'd rather you swing mightily and miss than just sort of like bunt to first base or whatever. So yeah, not a good baseball analogy. I want to say that the ending of this movie to me makes me cry because of its hopefulness. There's this long. It's like if you're reading Camus and all of a sudden the mother's alive. There's such generosity in this ending that I think people can easily overlook a little bit. I love that the message of the film might be that life is just about these little moments that you have with the people that you love. Maybe that's it. The great meaning of life that you go searching around and playing chess with death and reading Mankel and all of that. maybe it's just about hanging out on Saturday with 300 of your best friends and talking about a movie you like. Maybe that's actually enough. That's life. That's everything. And that's enough. It's those little moments that you maybe overlook in the moment that you think back on at the end of your life. You know, you never wish you worked more. You never wish that you quit. At the end of your life, you think back about, man, I wish that afternoon in the glade could last forever. I wish that we had done more of that. I wish that this had happened or that had happened. When my daughter was very young, when Mia was very young, her first movie was I went took her to a screening of some cartoon or something. On the way back, we used to wish on a star every night. We'd find the star and we'd wish on it. And it was getting dark, and I said, "Hey, there it is. You want to wish on a star?" And from the back seat, in her carrier, she said, "Daddy, I wish this night would go on forever." And that's to live like this, to live like that. Yeah, maybe that's what Seventh Seal at the end of it is about. God is in the people that you love and the people who love you back. And these little moments that maybe if we could appreciate them in the moment are what it's all about. So I'll leave the last word for you, Natasha, about the ending, which is mirrored, I think, in the end of the first season of Russian Doll.
I mean, I would just say here to all that. I sure hope so. It's a hard thing to, remember day to day. But yeah, I mean, just the idea that like hope is as wired into our sort of, DNA as anything else, for better or worse. And it really is. And yeah, I guess also maybe even, that idea of like what would you sacrifice for someone else, like the sort of idea of uh, like doing something for somebody and not even telling anyone about it, or something is probably part of that there is a sort of idea of highest humanity in that, of like not only pursuing sort of like selfish ends as reason for being is something that probably like brings a great sense of peace in those moments of darkness, much more than sort of personal victory. As much as we think that life is a race towards personal victory, that's actually sort of one of the illusions or great lies they've sold us on that sort of cause so much misery and feelings of failure. So that idea of doing something for even just like one other person, that's one tiny thing, could end up meaning so much to them relative to the grand scale of their lives. Might mean more than soaring personal achievement or something, and this delusion that getting there will mean something. So yeah, I mean, there's a great deal of like spirituality and just that tiny nugget that I think is transmitted, that we're translating as the experience of hope and viewing it.
So, really great place to end. Natasha, thank you so much. I know how busy you are, for being here today for the Denver Library and for these programs for At Home, and means so much to have you here. I can't tell you how much.
So
I
great to be
appreciate.
able to have to watch this again, and thank you to all of you guys for coming. It really is, this great small joy Walter and I get to have online. We're all like the movie dumb all the time. It just makes me so happy that there's a whole community out there that cares about all this stuff. Very special person, Walter. Thank you so much for having me.
Stop! You're gonna make me cry. All right, we're gonna play ourselves out today with an appearance by Arthur Lee on Jules Holland, playing the closing song from Russian Doll, as I'll always think of it now. So, thank you guys for coming, Natasha. Thank you so much.